It's Debbie and Adam here from the Spirit World, and we love The Next Right Thing because we get to pick those topics that are most important to you, and especially today when Dave Asherez does the Word of the Day, and he was talking about Psalm 23. Adam and I thought, wow, what a perfect opportunity for us to go line by line with Psalm 23 that we all know and love, and really see how it applies to our lives and our ministries, and I think it's just incredible. So Adam, I know you are going to dive right in, and our listeners are going to be just sitting on the edge of their seats wanting to know how this applies to their spiritual lives.
Yeah, Deb, you know, Psalm 23, it's probably the most famous of all the Psalms. Many people have heard at least the opening of it, and it's been used so much because it is just so beautiful and poetic. But what I wanted to do for fun is maybe just do kind of a commentary is kind of a boring word, kind of a decoding of Psalm 23.
Yes, a decoding.
A little bit. And I want to also, show how it actually plays out very much, even in the exorcism world, that I get to experience, as you always say, on a weekly basis, because that's the truth. So let's look at this, because this psalm really, I think this is a good place for us to go and to meditate upon when maybe we're dissatisfied with how life is going, or something isn't going exactly the way we think it should be going. And trusting Jesus, trusting God, trusting God's providence, not only when things are going great, but understanding that God's providence is still there when things are going mediocre, and even when they seem to be going badly. Because that's where the trust really is tested. So let's take a look at Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I lack. So here we're seeing a linking of allowing God to be our guide. Also, God does what? A shepherd guides, protects the sheep, right? So he gets the sheep out to pasture where they can feed. He protects them. He keeps them together in a community. And he also puts limits on where they go. Okay, so shepherding is a protective activity that God is doing for us, where he is defending us, he is keeping us together with the other sheep, with the other people that are pursuing a relationship with Christ. And that shepherding leads to, there's nothing I lack, because God is providing for me. So this is the part that I think the prosperity gospel stuff really gets wrong. The idea that, that means that God's going to make me rich and fat and, have abundance all of the time. God gives us what we need for his goals for us. And we're going to see at the end of the psalm that his ultimate goal for us is heaven. But while we're walking this walk on earth, he has his own goals for us, and he's going to give us what we actually need to achieve the goals that he wants us to achieve. So that's the first line I wanted to touch on. Let's move on. In green pastures he makes me lie down. To still waters he leads me. He restores my soul. So what are we seeing here? In green pastures he makes me lie down. Okay, so to lie down is to take rest. And to lie down is being vulnerable, to be able to go to sleep. You're vulnerable, but the shepherd is there, right? So he takes me to a green pasture. It is a green pasture so the sheep can eat. So there's a place that I am provided for. And it's so safe that I can lie down and sleep. So this is God's providence providing places in our life that have security, that have a time for us to rest. To still waters he leads me. Well, still waters is symbolic of peace, right? We remember the storm with the apostles and how they were fearful because the waters were rough and the storm was happening. The opposite is the still waters. So we see that God not only gives us rest, but he gives us peace. And then he restores my soul. Now this is interesting because to restore a soul means a soul has been harmed in some way, right? So this is forgiveness. Because I'm the one that damages my soul through sin. So through God's grace and his forgiveness, he restores me. So he's not only protecting me and keeping me in safe places, but he is forgiving me. He guides me along right paths for the sake of his name. So again, here's a reinforcement of God is guiding me in my life. I'm trying to submit to divine providence, to the spiritual direction provided to me by the church and, my local pastor, the priests in my parish, guiding me along right paths for the sake of his name. These right paths, so right in the line before we see the soul has been harmed and God restores it. We know he restores it through forgiveness and grace. Right paths is righteous action, peace, love, charitable acts, not sinning. So he not only restores me, but then he shows me the right way to move and to live. Okay, we're halfway through. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. Okay, so we've had all this reassurance that God is the shepherd. I am the sheep. He is going to protect me. He has a plan for me. I need to trust that. I'm not going to lack anything for the plan that he has for me. But now we realize, I'm in a world that is the valley of the shadow of death. The world is a place of darkness. And that's true. We know from original sin, the world is tainted. But I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So this is saying, okay, life isn't going to be easy. Yes, God has a plan. Yes, he will provide. Yes, he will give rest. But the world is evil. There is evil in the world. It's not all evil. There's lots of good. But we are not to fear it. This is critical, Deb, critical. I will fear no evil. It doesn't say I'll not fear some of it, or once in a while I'll be brave. I will fear no evil because God is with me. God's sovereignty is represented by the rod, and the staff is representing protection, the shepherd's staff. So the sovereignty of God, I'm reminded that God is king over all of creation, and that his staff represents his protection. Do you have any thoughts so far, Deb?
Oh, yes. I'm following along with you, but I was wondering if you were going to go all the way to the end first. But let me just comment on a couple things. Let's go back up to the beginning of Psalm 23 and this idea of being at peace and being calm, right? It's our job, and I love how at the beginning of the psalm it's setting the stage for us to be in that peaceful feeling, and to remind ourselves and reinforce ourselves continuously that we are to aim for that. See, a lot of people, I think there's a bit of almost a, if you want to call it like an adrenaline rush or something, that they go from one drama scene to another, and there's energy to that, right? And so we are meant to be in that calm, peaceful, content place, that place of safety, because we know who is God. We know he's in charge. We know he's got our backs. He's protecting us. He's caring for us. He has our best interests at heart. He knows every hair on our head. He knows the best path forward. And so it's our job to be searching for that peace rather than searching for that drama. What do you say to that first? Because I do think it requires that participation and cooperation.
Yeah, I think we have to, so we know theologically we have to cooperate with God's grace, right?
Right.
So we have free will even when we receive grace. And sanctifying grace, of course, we all receive through Jesus and his coming into the world, his death, his resurrection. The world was sanctified. And then we receive different forms of grace ourselves, but we have to say yes and cooperate with them. And part of that is this perspective to trust in God and trust in his grace is itself a cooperation with grace, because to have this perspective in spite of the darkness that we live in is a grace. It's a transformative grace that we are given. And we've mentioned it in recent weeks. You know, the saint to look at for the most probably extreme example of this is Maximilian Kolbe.
That's right.
Who, while he was in a concentration camp being starved to death voluntarily because he had replaced a man who had a family, while he's there voluntarily, he doesn't despair. So he understood this and lived it so well that even in that circumstance, facing a painful death, There's basically little to no chance of getting out of that situation. He was singing hymns.
That's right.
Almost certainly hearing confessions if people were Catholic. He was joyful.
Right.
And this is a transformative psalm. This isn't about God's going to make you rich and provide you an abundance of food. It's a transformative psalm about the reality of life in the world.
Right. Right. No, I'm glad you said that. But, and you know where I'm going with this. When folks get into, I guess, I don't know, what would you call it, Adam? Is it adrenaline or cortisol or whatever that puts people in the fight or flight mode where they're constantly in that agitated, ready to fight phase or to like they have to defend? When we're in that level, we're going to constantly be drawing to us more anxiety-filled things around us. Whereas you brought up Saint Maximilian Kolbe. How could they be praising God and be in joy-filled and everything when they know that their life is going to end in any second? But they were able to do that because I believe they reinforced the truths of God. We're talking about Psalm 23. We're picking up where Dave Vasherez was sharing with the word of the day, and we thought it was so important to go line by line. And Adam, I want you to continue with Psalm 23, but let's just revisit this again about this idea that of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, because you brought up what a great saint he is in the fact that he could maintain that joy. And if you look at as a lot of the lives of the saints that were martyred, you can. You'll hear in their story that there was a point, even right before death, actually they were dying at that moment, that they still were singing hymns and praising God. How were they able to do that? We were talking about it earlier before we prepared this segment of The Next Right Thing. It's so true that when you develop a relationship with God and you are very connected, and so many of these saints being so connected to the Blessed Mother as well, it's just so natural for them to stay focused and in that place because they take this Psalm 23 very seriously. They're not going to go into that darkness because once they entertain that darkness and think that they're left alone, away and disconnected from God, well, yeah, then they're going to be in big trouble. All the fear, anxiety, and all the stress is going to be heaped on them to the point where it's going to just paralyze them to be able to say or speak or do anything. So, Adam, go back to that for 1 second, because I think that is such a key point that we just want to zero in on for our Morning Joy listeners, that this is, if you really want peace and you really want that feeling of being protected, develop your relationship and your connection with God, to God and the Blessed Mother. It's so important.
Yeah, and as you said during our discussion before the show, Deb, it's not enough to simply say I'm at peace. That doesn't make it so. We know from therapy and life coaching that it takes work to develop things to stop, negative internal thoughts, and use diaphragmatic breathing, use other techniques to find more peace in your life, to bring prayer into your life on a daily basis throughout the day. There's a number of ways that we do that as Catholic Christians. Okay, so what we've seen so far is God's our shepherd, he's our provider, he's a protector, he's a guide. We see that we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that the world has evil in it, but I will fear no evil, for God is with me. Okay, here's the transformative turn, the next stanza, essentially. You set a table before me in front of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. So here it's not just that we are to be at peace amongst the evil that we may encounter in the world, but God's going to take it even further, and he's going to set a table before me in front of my enemies. Wow. So that when I'm trusting God, when I'm at peace with his providence, when I trust that he has my best interest in heart, he's going to give me what I need for his goals in my life, that is the table set before my enemies, because God is right there with me. You anoint my head with oil. Okay, so this is this is leading up to the next verse here. Anointing the head with oil is a blessing. It's an elevating of the person through a symbolism that shows an elevation and a respect and an anointing, literally an anointing, okay, from God. My cup overflows. So now I have so much before my enemies, my cup actually overflows. But what does that really mean? What does all that mean? Let's see in the next verse of this that's talking about heaven. Because this psalm is not only about trust now, but trust in heaven later. So here we go. Why is the head being anointed with oil? Why is the cup overflowing? Let's continue. Indeed, goodness and mercy will pursue me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord for endless days. Beautiful. So, goodness and mercy, that goes back to what we talked about with the restoring of my soul, that comes through the grace of God and the mercy of God. So goodness and mercy will pursue me. God will pursue me all the days of my life, not some of them, but all of them. And his mercy will always be available to me. And if I cooperate with that goodness in spite of the circumstances and partake of that goodness, which is the table that's set before me, then where do we end, Deb? We end with, I will dwell in the house of the Lord for endless days. That's heaven. Because the house of the Lord is heaven and endless days is eternity. So what Psalm 23 is doing, it's not only giving us a perspective with which to live in the world and to deal with difficulty, evil, adversity, but it's pointing out that when we understand it properly, God is with us through that. And the goodness and mercy is pursuing us through that journey, through the difficulty in life, and leads to an endless days with the Lord in heaven where your cup is overflowing and your head is anointed. And so, again, trust now, trust in heaven later. And that trust in heaven later is a big part of what transforms right now into something that is doable, that is peaceful, and is blessed.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that is so powerful. With today being the whole focus around Psalm 23, I hope that our listeners really do take the time and read and reread line by line and just really let it sink in. Let it truly go deep inside of you so that you can really start to practice it in your daily life. Because I just think when we have that sense of security, Adam, when we have that assurance that we're headed in the right direction, and if we stay focused and not get distracted by all the darkness that's all around us in this world, I mean, it really is a very direct, clear path back home to God. I love it.
Yeah. And, my final comment on this, comes from the end of the work that I do that is intense, where the evil literally is before us and our enemies are literally in front of us, and that is in the exorcism world. And this psalm is, it is the perspective that we need to adopt because we are literally before our enemies. And we have a way back to heaven. They don't. And it's so clear the gifts are there, the forgiveness is there, the forgiveness for us, the forgiveness for the people that are suffering, that are possessed, the grace that they receive to get through that process and ultimately be freed. And that all of us are destined, if we cooperate with that grace, for heaven. Right. This plays out in such a real, physical way for those of us in this work each week that it helps us in our regular day-to-day lives. Wow.